Thank you for auditing Professor Skye's Record Review, the always positive new music review show hosted by a French professor one day before his 43rd birthday. I'm going to be reviewing the album American Head by the Flaming Lips, and I'm excited to do so. It's going to get one of my highest possible ratings. I don't give ratings, but I believe it is a maybe masterpiece, meaning with time, I might realize this is a masterpiece. That's how good it is. But yet, I have been sleeping on the Flaming Lips for almost 20 years, and I want to talk about why now. Now, it's a thing that I do on this channel. I kind of think of myself as like a rock Rip Van Winkle. You know, the character who fell asleep by a tree and woke up 400 years later. When I turned 23 in around 2000, when I graduated college, I experienced what I refer to as mid-20s music death. I shut myself off to any new music that I did not already love. I mean love. So, you know, Radiohead, I loved Radiohead and I stuck with Radiohead, but bands like Flaming Lips kind of dropped off, you know? And, you know, like it's funny because the way I actually got into Radiohead, you'd think it was with their song She Don't Use Jelly, which was a surprisingly big hit in the 90s. I mean, like, it was a hit, right? Like, if you were in high school, even if you were a jock, you knew She Uses Vaseline, like, you knew that song. That wasn't how I got into them. Bizarrely enough, the way that I got into them, if you look behind there, I have a little Batman comic there with the Riddler. They were on the Batman Forever soundtrack, an underrated movie and a way underrated soundtrack. The soundtrack is known for the U2 song, is known for Kissed by a Rose by Seal, but this Flaming Lips song was amazing, and it was amazingly placed, and it's in the movie for 1 second when you see the Riddler. And just listening to that was what ended up making me think, you know what, I think I like the Flaming Lips. So next time they released an album, I bought Clouds Taste Metallic, and I loved it, and I thought it was the greatest thing ever. And I'm like, awesome, awesome. But you know what? I'm a '90s kid. I'm a Generation Xer. I'm gonna be a contrarian. And I'm not gonna buy the next easiest album to buy. I'm gonna get telepathic surgery, which is good, but as a hard listen. So I'm like, that's okay, that's cool. I'll just get Hit to Death in the Future Head, which is another hard listen. And then finally, I'm like, you know what I'm gonna do? I'm just gonna get a collection of their stuff, because then that'll be easier. But then I got a collection of like their early stuff. So I went from this one album that was pretty accessible and pretty enjoyable to their hardest to listen to, most raw stuff. And I just kind of decided, they're not for me. So when the Soft Bulletin came out, I'm like, yeah, I don't really like them that much. When Yomiuri and the Battle Robots or whatever it is came out, I was old. I was like 24 years old. Flaming Lips did not make it into that category of music that I love, because in the 90s, when I went to Newbury Comics, or wherever the hell I went, I decided to be a cool guy and buy the hardest to listen to Flaming Lips music instead of the one that had Vaseline on it, because that's objectively a good song. I can actually tell you the only time I thought about Flaming Lips in between 2000 and 2020. Isn't that funny? If you're paying attention behind me, you will pick up the clue, and it's a rather macabre clue. You see, in 2012, June 12th, 2012, in Toronto, Ontario, Canada, at Downsview Park, Radiohead were to perform a concert. My family are huge Radiohead fans. They're one of the bands that made the cut. And like my son especially was a huge fan, and we drove there together from Rochester, New York to Toronto. Now, Rochester, New York to Toronto, on paper, is like a 3-hour drive. In reality, it's like a 5-hour drive, because driving in Toronto sucks. It is the worst place on earth to drive. Maybe not the worst on earth. It's the worst place I've ever driven in North America. And I've driven a lot of places in North America. It's terrible, especially when there's a concert. So here we are, we're driving, we're in traffic for hours and listening to music and getting all excited and trying to keep a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old, no, a 5-year-old and a 7-year-old like excited and engaged, which is not easy at all to do in a long car ride. And we get up and we wait and we finally get up to the front and we talk to a police officer, and like, we like to park, and like, sorry folks, park's closed. You didn't hear? Show's canceled. Turn it around. So we're just absolutely crushed, totally crushed. Turns out, and if you know a little bit about Radiohead history, you probably know this story vaguely. This was the show where somebody made the stage wrong, and I believe it was a drum tech died when some of the stage fell on him. A tragic story, a sad story. I My son has still never seen Radiohead. It's terrible. That's why I bought him at least the poster, so he has like some memento of a show he didn't go to. But this was this very weird and sad feeling. So we go back to our hotel and we start walking around downtown Toronto, and we hear some music playing. And we figure it's going to be some like bad blues cover band or some kind of like public art, like Who Cares band is going to be playing, or some Canadian band that through their 10% law is like huge there but isn't big anywhere else. So, you know, I'm sort of thinking like, I don't know, like if we're lucky, it'll be the Crash Test Dummies or something, who are a fine band, by the way. But, you know, like that was the level I was thinking. And it's the Flaming Lips. The Flaming Lips are playing a free outdoor concert in downtown Toronto that exact time. And I remember thinking very specifically, I should have listened to Ted and listened to Yomiuri and the Big Robots, or whatever that album is called. Like, I should have kept on with the Flaming Lips, because this experience would have been amazing. I would have played them for my family, I would have played them for my kids, and it would have been amazing. We would have been experiencing something that was almost as good. I mean, Flaming Lips and Radiohead are not quite on the same level, but they're very close, I think, you know, in terms of music and influence and artistry and all that. But instead, we just stood and we just watched a couple songs. And we watched them play Knives Out, the Radiohead song. And they somehow managed to make a Radiohead song sadder, which is pretty impressive. But in general, you know, it was fun. It was cool. We watched a couple songs and then we left. We didn't know them. And I just sort of said, well, that was awesome and that was cool. Maybe sometime I'll listen to their new stuff. That time is now in 2020. This new album is an amazing album. When I first listened to it, my initial take was kind of weird because it feels so epic, and it feels at times like it's trying to be epic. Like it feels like every song could be a closer on another album. Like it has this sort of like finality and like scope to it that most music doesn't have, and certainly not what I associate with the Flaming Lips. I mean, musically it's similar in most of the ways. You know, the voice of the singer Wayne Coyne is very high and nasally, maybe a little bit affected by age, as all our voices are. Sort of intentionally loose musicianship, which is great, mostly guitar-led, some piano. There's some electronic bloops and bleeps in here, but not too much. Idiosyncratic lyrics that kind of turn to the left and turn to the right. The thing that really turned me off about them when I was younger, when I was 23, is that so much of their music, this kind of neo-psychedelia, seemed to be it seemed so drug-influenced. It's that kind of music where people go, oh man, if you're not tripping balls, you're not liking this music, man. And like, I don't care about that. I don't do drugs, I don't like drugs, I don't like dealing with it. But this album takes all of those elements and just sort of puts them on a much grander scale. If I had to actually compare this album to any album I've reviewed, not musically, but in terms of scale, I would compare it to Pedro the Lion's Phoenix. You see, Pedro the Lion's Phoenix is a grand epic album about this guy's youth in the early 80s in a specific town in America. This album, American Head, is a intense, epic album about some guy's youth in the late 70s, early 80s, except it's Oklahoma. And the difference here between this music and a lot of their other music is it doesn't feel influenced by drugs. It seems to be about the influence of drugs. You know, partly about the influence of drugs on a young guy growing up in Oklahoma. The big fear that you have, and the big fear that I had listening the first time, is that it's going to be pretentious or pompous. I mean, especially with a name like American Head. Like anytime anything is called American blank, like you know they're trying to go for something. Oh, sorry, I just moved my camera. Anytime they go like, you know, American Beauty, American Ninja, whatever it is, like that's like a shorthand, kind of a cheap way of making something seem more grand and like, I'm not making a statement about me, I'm making a statement about my country. And not just any country, but the most country of any country there is right now. But it's okay. Like that kind of cliche moves on. That doesn't actually figure in too much about the album. I don't really actually feel like this album is particularly a comment on America itself or even American values. It really does feel to be this beautiful concept album about the life of a young stoner in the late 70s and early 80s. I would go further to say that it's cinematic. It actually feels like you're watching a movie. And I think any good concept album will do that. It's like, it's this kind of gritty, I'd say it's a gritty movie, but it has bright colors in it, okay? And it's set in Oklahoma, late 70s, early 80s, and the music is epic. And the thing is with this album, there's actually some hints that it's kind of cinematic, because there's a couple instrumental interludes, and they use sound effects, like barking dogs and cows and stuff, and motorcycles. And it's this heartwarming story about the disillusionment that comes with the end of youth. A burnout who didn't burn out, and who's just talking about his life. It also reminds me a little bit of Pink Floyd's The Wall, but just no war, just on a much smaller scale, much more intimate scale. Just America in the 70s, and dead-end jobs, and crime, and just kind of desperation and getting high, and hoping to get out of the scene of being high. It's a movie, and it's filled with humanity, sweetness, sadness. It's sort of, I think you'd do pretty well. I think this would be a fun idea. Watch Fast Times at Ridgemont High, and then listen to this album, because I feel they're similar, the kind of desperation. Of course, LA is very different than Oklahoma, but the same kind of feel of like, what was the late 70s and early 80s like? Like, what was that desperation? My biggest fear going into this record, because I knew I wanted to review it, I knew I wanted to tell you the story about Downsview Park and going to Toronto and buying all the wrong Flaming Lips albums when I was 17 or whatever, is that so many of the album tracks are about drugs. And I'm like, is this... Okay, if you're not old, you don't know this, okay? Old like me, 43, as of tomorrow. Like, hanging around with middle-aged people and older, as they talk about when they used to get high, is some of the most excruciatingly painful conversations you will ever hear. Now, just being straight and being around stoned people is annoying. But being straight and being around other straight people who talk to you about, oh, one time, man, we took mushrooms and we went to the Fish concert, and I said, like, just shut up. Do I have to get it coming and going back? So that was my big fear. I said this album was just going to be some old dude, because this guy's even older than me, just talking about doing drugs and what it was like. In some ways, that's what I didn't like about the last Who album. It felt a little bit too much like, we were wild. But it's not that. This isn't about We Were Wild. This is Oklahoma in 1982, 1983, 1979, somewhere around there, and the drugs that were there, and the drugs were an important part of this character's life, the character who's singing all these songs. It's not, I wouldn't say it's literal. I don't think there's one character, because I think there's almost two different stories here. The story of the boy that lived and the story of the boy that died. And it feels like interchangeably the singer goes in between being the boy that lived and the boy that died. Apparently, if I remember correctly, someone told me a story that he was held up, like working a fast food job, and like almost died. So maybe I get the sense maybe this is like in one version he dies, in the other version he doesn't. So that's the context of the album, and that's what makes it an amazing record, and I'm going to go track by track right now, but the whole thing is just, it is this beautifully wonderful movie. It is an engaging movie with great musicianship that just pulls you through, and lots of nice poetic turns. So, I'm feeling bad. I didn't hear that. I think I read that on Wikipedia, that he was held up. Someone might have told me that in the past, but I don't know why I tried to act like I talk to people who talk to me about Flaming Lips. I don't. I read that on Wikipedia, I think yesterday. And I think it was Long John Silver's. No, in fact, I know it was. Why am I trying to act cool, Skye? My thing isn't being cool. My thing is knowing I'm not cool. So yeah, apparently he was held up at a Long John Silver's and thought he was going to die. And so I would say that we could see that moment in this album. It's never mentioned. He never talks about selling fish sticks, but there appears to be a sort of crossover moment where he could have died, and in this album, he dies and doesn't die. So let's start off with the song "Will You Return When You Come Down," and right off the bat with some drug terminology here. The idea of like when someone comes down from being high, will they return to them? Some xylophones. Some of the very dark themes come in immediately with the concept of all your friends are dead. Some great bass work. It's about mortality, youthful stupidity. And this is what I'm talking about, the grand scope of everything. The end of this song like reminds me of Hey Jude. Like it has that kind of like huge ending, and it's the first track. The most important part musically for me is the drums. This is my favorite drumming, I believe, of the year. It is unbelievably good drumming, and I'm going to talk more about it when I talk about a song later. But this album is worth listening to just for the drums. And apparently, when I saw them in 2012, that was their old drummer. So maybe that's why I didn't stick around in Toronto. The next track is called Watching the Light Bugs Glow. And this is an instrumental track. And it is, both the instrumental tracks are like, they are not filler. They are so good. They are so engaging. They're tied into the songs around them thematically. Like, I would say they're my favorite songs, but I love the singing as well. So the instrumental tracks can't be my favorite, but I think they might be my favorite. Kind of like the track Flying on Magical Mystery Tour. Like, that's an amazing song. That I used to say when I was a contrarian, that's my favorite track on Magical Mystery Tour. But it's like, if they were singing on it, it would be better, but it would be worse, and it makes the whole album so much better. That's what the instrumental tracks are on here. And then the track name itself, Watching the Light Bugs Glow, is tied into the next song, and the songs segue really nicely into each other. There's a really great flow song to song on this album. Leads into the song Flowers of Neptune 6, which talks about taking acid and watching the light bugs glow, wishing they were spaceships. We'll come back to spaceships later. And here I want to play you some of the music so you get an idea of what it sounds like. I'm going to play the part where the drums come in, right around 2 minutes. And it is my favorite drumming. What they're doing is they're doing a lot of like fills where they kind of start with the floor toms, and the toms are really kind of detuned. And speaking of the Beatles, it sounds kind of like good Ringo fills, and Ringo's fills are very like everything else with Ringo, very underrated. But the dong da dong da da da, and I can't do it. You have to hear it. And just the way they come in, it's just some of the best rock drumming. It's not flashy, but it's exactly right. I'm going to play you this part where the drums come in. You hear some of the epic feel of it, and then I'll let it play for a little bit more so you can hear the singer come in, and you get an idea of what this whole album sounds like. So I'm going to play that for you right now. Flowers of Neptune 6 by the Flaming Lips. And you know, that his sort of spiritual, Tame Impala, his sort of spiritual son, does a lot of those fills as well on the slow rush. And I don't know if that's just a thing of psychedelic rock where they figure out how to get these great, simple drum fills, but I think you get a sense of the whole feeling there. It's well layered, it's well played, it's just excellent. The next track, Dinosaurs on the Mountain, like the title itself, is kind of childish, sort of wishing something else had happened in the past. Goes on to another track that seems to be about similar. It's called At the Movies on Quaaludes, and much like there's no dinosaurs on the mountain, I guess you can't get Quaaludes anymore. That's according to some druggy friends I had once. That is true. I didn't read that on Wikipedia. I used to have a lot of druggy friends. Kind of boring, but again, it's really nice when the drums come in and it's too long, but then it leads up to the centerpiece of the album, maybe the heart of the album, Mother, I've Taken LSD. Boy, did I think I was going to hate this track. But I love it. I love it because it seems honest and it seems true. Now, first of all, the mention of Mother. There's a couple songs about Mother on here. Part of what makes this an engaging album is that this figure, this solitary figure who is both dead and alive at the same time, even though he's a druggie who's selling drugs and doing drugs and at the outskirts of society, seems to have a very firm connection to his mother, and his mother appears to matter a lot, which adds dimension to him. You know, he's not just some loner. Like, you feel that he's a kid. That's the thing. The whole album feels like a kid. Like a kid, like a high school kid. And you feel for him. And when there's a song called Mother, I've Taken LSD, you get that. And these lyrics are beautiful. You know, he says, I thought it would make me free, but I'm afraid that it's changed me. So instead of whatever he thought would happen after listening to Magical Mystery Tour, maybe, instead of becoming some free sage who understands everything, instead he opens himself up to the cruelty and the sadness of the world. And the song ends up being that. And it's not, you know, it's not about like a bad trip. It's just saying that maybe opening the doors of perception are also opening them to all the bad things. And so like each verse, so the first verse talks about doing acid, then the next one is about a friend of his who's a girl who's at the psych ward now because she tried to rob a drugstore, which reminded me of Drugstore Cowboy, which then made me think this whole album would fit pretty well with Drugstore Cowboy as well. Gus Van Sant's movie about like young kids robbing drugstores for opiates. A really prescient movie. That was a good movie. It's back when Gus Van Sant was great. Then another friend who he lost to a motorcycle crash, this real theme of just youth dying, young people dying and youth dying. And the drummer, I guess there's two drummers, Matt Duckworth and Lay something or other. Just the drumming on here too. Really, if you don't like the music, if you're like, I don't like this guy, he's whining, just listen for the drumming. It is just a refreshingly amazing drumming. It's all like that. It's not Neil Peart, whatever. It's just well-chosen, well-tuned, emotionally resonant drumming. The next track, Brother I, seems to be a song about a brother who might die or who is dying or who did die. I feel like this might be sung about the singer himself by his brother. I can't quite tell what this is, but the death is all around this album, and this song, it's there. This is cool though because there's computer sounds that go along, that kind of go up with it, and this is the best example in this album of the marriage of electronic and acoustic instruments. This might be the best track to play if you think you don't like the Flaming Lips because they're too psychedelic. This might be the best track. Just Can You Live Forever, asking over and over again. And then we have the next track, which is another one of these tentpole songs in the album that sort of sets up this great epic scale, You and Me Sellin' Weed. Now, very kind of Neil Youngish at times here, but it's this romantic song, sort of, about a kid, a boyfriend and a girlfriend who sell weed, and in that way become like the kings of the town, right? They keep calling themselves kings and queens, and about this like desire for freedom and feeling this illusion that they have freedom, and it's really sad and desperate. And then this weird thing happens where the song like starts to go on an uptick and starts to get kind of like change keys, and then like immediately downshifts and slows way down again and talks about a different couple, like one who sells coke and the other who works at a slaughterhouse, and like how they have it figured out. And it's just this really just evocative image, right? Like, can't you imagine 1984, Oklahoma, like a couple where like one of them sells coke and maybe has a nice car and the other works at a slaughterhouse, and they're at the edges of society and they sort of have money and they sort of don't. It's really sad, and it's really emphasized by the fact that they want to get out of this life, and that's in the lyrics. Danny and Grace got it all figured out. He's dealing coke while she works at the slaughterhouse. Nice rhyme. You gotta live what you do, got blood in my shoe, driving to work, sun's coming up, wish it was a spaceship coming for us, take us away to some royal parade. So this is not the only time on the album where I'm heavily reminded of the song After the Gold Rush by Neil Young. That's a song where he talks about being high and kind of sad, and spaceships come in and talks about spaceships taking people away. And we have the lightning bug spaceships, and we have here, and this theme of sort of like drugs and escapism and spaceships coming to take them away on a royal parade. I think it's intentional. I think there's sort of intentional references throughout the album to music that he might have been listening to while he was doing all these drugs at this time. And I think certainly Neil Young would be one of those people, especially in the context of the way that he sings and the way this song actually sounds. And it's just beautiful. And then the chorus comes in and it has sort of like weird drum machines and kind of Twin Peaks keyboard. Yeah, we were the king and queen, dope-dealing celebrities in our dreams, dreaming that one day we'll get out of this scene to the magic trees. They're constantly trying to get out. They're in a desperate situation, and they're probably not going to, right? They're just stuck in this position. They actually have some sounds in the background of cows from the slaughterhouse, which makes this the second song with slaughterhouse cows in it. The first, of course, being Meat is Murder by the Smiths. I don't think this is an intentional reference, but it is weird. And then the next song actually has some dogs barking, and which I'm not going to play because my dogs are already awake. They're trying to wake up my family because they want to eat breakfast. Because I'm doing this video. My whole family has to go on hold. It's okay. They know it's good that I do this, or else I'd just be talking about music all the time. The next track is called Mother, Please Don't Be Sad. Don't listen to this song. Okay, so you know, my mom died a couple years ago. This song made me sad for that reason. Don't listen to this if you ever had a dead child in your family. Don't listen to this if you're really moved by death. It's a really sad song because it's don't be sad, it's only me that died. It's this song from a son to his mother saying, don't worry about the fact that I died. It starts off with a French horn and a piano. Again, very After the Gold Rush by Neil Youngie, which on the auto-correct on my notes, they corrected it to After the Goldfish, which is a very different Neil Young song. I don't think that song exists. And then there's some like cello, and it's all about getting shot in a robbery. And this song's almost cheesy. It's so approachable and likable. It reminds me a little bit of Don't Look Back in Anger by Oasis, which is a song that I like, despite the fact that I pretend like I hate Oasis. But it's just so sad. But it's also kind of uplifting at the same time, because he's saying, you know, don't worry, many other people are alive. And if I were there, I'd be alive too, and everyone here loves you. And then he talks about, you know, make sure you let out the dogs tonight, and that's why you have the barking. And there's this concept that he comes back to, and this ends up being the name of the next instrumental song. When we die when we're high, the gatekeeper hides his eyes and lets us by. So this weird, I get the sense this must have been something that he thought when he was a kid, because no adult would think like this about heaven or drugs or anything. But just this sense that like it's okay. Like if I die when I'm high, I'm not going to go to hell just because I'm high. It's this youthful guilt. And guilt when you're young is totally different than guilt when you're older, right? Like you have a different conception of what is good and bad and why you are good or why you are bad. So a beautiful term, just a beautiful idea of just like going to heaven and being high and having, you know, St. Peter just like, okay, go ahead, I'm just going to pretend like you're not high. Which might actually be a little bit like parents who can tell that their kids are high or drunk, who just kind of let them in the house and don't say anything about it. I know people who have parents like that. And then it leads into the instrumental track, When We Die, When We're High, exactly the same way I felt about the last instrumental track, just awesome. And the drummer's going nuts. Okay, if you don't like the singer, but you want to hear what I'm talking about with the drummer, listen to the track, When We Die, When We're High. It's just great. There's some dogs from the previous track who are still barking. In this way, it reminds me a little bit of Animals from Pink Floyd, just because the dog's barking, but then I realized the whole album, maybe it doesn't really feel like The Wall. Maybe this sort of sonically, it kind of puts me in that feeling of Animals by Pink Floyd. I'm making a lot of comparisons today. I don't usually do that. Oh well. And again, it could just be because this kind of Pink Floyd influence would be, you know, the music that you listen to when you're kind of young and druggy. And then for an album which I claim to be a maybe masterpiece, we have the maybe come in. The last 3 tracks, this is, I need time, okay? So, you know, I reviewed the Strokes album, that was one of my biggest hits, and I said that I didn't like the song Ode to the Mets. And I got 1,000 comments about that, about how it's terrible, about how I'm wrong and I'm stupid. And I bought the album and I've re-listened to it, and I now like Ode to the Mets. But the last 3 tracks on this album, none of them hit for me. Assassins of Youth, it's interesting thematically because it's about the relationship between like being told lies and losing your youth, but it's just kind of thin. It's cool though, it's got a good bass to it, but it's just kind of a 60s era folk song. Not my favorite. Then God and the Policemen, again, a fascinating concept about like the way youth people feel about being guilty, like what youthful guilt is, and the idea that God and a policeman would be the same person. It's kind of like a xylophone, almost like a hip-hop style beat. Casey Musgrave sings along. It's kind of a duet, some more sound effects in here as well. But I don't know. I mean, thematically I like it. The idea of him worrying about God forgiving him. Because it does appear as though this one who died is here. You know, this is the one who died talking about dying. And then it ends with My Religion Is You. I don't know if this is supposed to be a direct quotation of The Wall. We don't need no education. You know, I don't need no religion. That's a push. That's a push. But still, this whole song about, you know, it's cool if you're Buddhist, it's cool if you're Christian, all I believe in is you. I like the mystery of my religion is you. You know, is the you... I mean, I'm tempted to think my religion is you is something romantic. So like the woman who he was dealing drugs with, that's his religion. But maybe it's not. Maybe it's his mother, you know, something that he believes in and loves. Or maybe it's the drugs. Maybe his religion is the drugs that give him the illusion of being able to get out of the life that his drugs partly keep him in. I don't know. I like that mystery. The drums here are nice as well. There's a little guitar solo. These last 3 tracks aren't terrible. They're good. And on any other album, I'd say they were great. But for the rest of the album, it ends on a little bit of a sour note. But that's just me. That's just my take on that. So there you go. There's my long history, Rip Van Winkle's history of the Flaming Lips. I guess I should get the Soft Bulletin and Yomiuri versus the Super Yogurts. Seriously, I remember I was in LA in 2002, and it was my friend Ted, the same guy who told me to listen to Pedro the Lion. And he's like, Skye, you got to hear the new Flaming Lips. Like, it's really good. They've really made a jump up. And I remember just being like, yeah, I don't know. That same guy, by the way, also told me that Netflix, the company that sent you know, DVDs by mail, was planning on having you watch movies on your computer. I was like, you are out of your mind. How could they ever do that? It will never happen. Netflix is the stupidest company. Why would they do that? No, they're just going to be sending DVDs forever. So Ted was right about something else. All right, well, I'm going to go let my kids finally get up. My wife is making me some grape nut pudding for tomorrow. I'm very excited about that. I'll tell you about it on Monday. Until then, there's the camera.